Yeah, part of it's with the serrations, or not, part of it's support material. Part of it is
I don't know
that.
yeah.
Like,
It's not very yeah.
Dyslexia strikes again.
I'm aware.
yeah, no, this is the first time. Sure, that's not good. Sure, that's not good.
All right, it's 3:10. First order of business. Take your homeworks. I've got the 3 o'clock section, but I'm not going to pass them out. If you're in the 3 o'clock section but attending this section, then you need to come up and grab yours. Otherwise, they should be in the pile. Now, in terms of the performance on the homework, most people on all the problems did pretty well. There's still a measurable handful of people that aren't even doing a significant number of the problems. I perused the graders' results, and it got me a little depressed. So we can't talk about the homework right now because we're in exam mode and homeworks relate to exams. So all I will do is encourage those who are still iffy on the material to review the solutions. All right? That's as much as I can tell you. There may be valuable information in terms of doing the exam there. And again, just another reminder, these exams are not group exams. I had a dream last night that I walked into a room and it was kind of a canteen, and lo and behold, there was a whole group of 331 students in there, and they all kind of dropped their jaws when I walked in because they were all working together in a group to finish the exam. Such are the travails of being a professor. Especially like the all right, so let's get moving here. First order of business is to review any clarifications we got through the exam last time. By the way, I was going to mention the homework in format here, but I'm not going to mention it. Those of you, and there are a number of you, and I feel bad, because I'd like to help you. But when you leave things blank on the homework, that's a really bad sign. It's like you've got other priorities, and I can appreciate that, but you need to at least put some amount of effort into the class. So look at the homework. I'm not going to go through the homework. Go to the exam. All right, I did a little bit of upgrading at 4:30 after the 3 p.m. section, and there really wasn't any significant difference. So I posted it, and that upgraded exam is now online. You are responsible for the upgrade. If you have an earlier printout version and I grade, and you give answers per that earlier edition, and the answers are wrong because the addition was incorrect, then your answers are wrong. That's why we spend this time going through it, is so that we can get things corrected. Any questions on the exam? Yes?
For problem 1D, is the yaw rate formula, is that just in 355?
Pardon me?
The yaw rate formula, is that just from...
Problem 1D?
Yeah, 1D.
The one I'm looking at?
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with 355, except that we talked about yaw in 355, but other than that, this is a 331 concept. This is not feedback control. You're flying a plane. You have a stick that controls the rudder, right? You give the stick a pull, correct? That rudder deflects, and it stays there. So what kind of input have you given the rudder? A step. A 10-degree step. That's the input to the system. What do you expect to achieve in the steady state in terms of yaw rate? Got it? We talked about this in 355, but not in terms of systems, inputs, and outputs. Right? But this is the heart of this course, is now we're looking at everything as inputs and outputs to and from a system. Yes?
For one, it's either 1A or 1B, when you ask for full zero cancellations, that near full, what is your margin of error for near? How?
I'm not going to give you a number. There should be, if you do the roots of those numerator and denominator polynomials, there should be two real numbers, that one in the numerator, one in the denominator, that are pretty darn close to each other. There's only two of them. So that's the margin of error. Other questions? Let's go fishing. Come on. Just around the corner, yeah, fish for stuff.
On number 2, I think it's the one about the tracking.
Yeah.
You said you can ignore the antenna dynamics.
Yes.
Does that mean you can ignore the antenna?
Yes.
Okay.
The antenna is one. We are all one now.
Okay.
The antenna's gone. This was in a previous exam, and when I copied and pasted it to create the new exam, and I changed the problem immensely, I decided to leave that antenna transfer function in there only so that if you go to the CEO of Rockwell Collins, he's actually giving an AIAA talk here. If you talk to this woman about what Rockwell is doing and stuff, and they start talking about things like dynamics, you'll be aware that an antenna tracking system isn't just a motor. It's a complicated system with lots of different blocks to it. That's the only reason this is here. Does it pertain to the problem? No. Any other questions? Clarifications? You guys are boringly smart. I think more you should go to the 3 p.m. section and maybe mix up the gene pool a little bit. I'm just kidding, you're pretty smart. You're all learning. Everybody's like Mr. Rogers. Everybody's special. No other questions? All right then, fair enough. This is sweet. It's hump day, and we are moving into the last portion of the course. We are now in the 10th week, aren't we? We're at the end of the second third of the course. It's a 15-week semester. So what we're going to do now is get into the third week of the course. But in order to get into the third week, I almost had a heart attack. Just like when I walked into that canteen. We're going to introduce state-space dynamics. And we'll start with this, because it's Wednesday. Come on. Where's the volume?
There was a simple baby, please
Now, what I want you to do is estimate his bandwidth.
Well, it goes like this before we might have fallen, lift the baffled king of
What's his bandwidth? 42. Now, there's the actual frequency bandwidth of his voice, which is low, but it goes fairly soprano level. But then there's also the tempo. The tempo itself has a bandwidth, doesn't it? So bandwidth is everywhere, right? Okay. It is a house. It's a Wednesday hump day. And the question then is, why? Why is it so special?
Whoa.
Well, because in the beginning, yes. Well, that's not the answer I'm looking for. There you go. That's the one I was looking for. No, actually, this is dynamics. I flash something up on the screen, whether it's a Hallelujah YouTube or whether it's this, and you people have a reaction. Some of you have a very low bandwidth reaction. Others have a higher bandwidth reaction, and others basically are not engaged. And you know, there's a good thing about not being engaged. Be careful what you wish for. So, this is actually dynamics. In the very beginning of the semester, I brought up a PDF file called The Dynamics of Grief. Right? Now, these dynamics are very high dimensional dynamics. They're not like a little second order system where you have a resonance or you have a time constant. They have lots of state variables. And in aerospace engineering, you people have more state variables than anybody except hardcore robotics people. Like if you've seen Big Dog and these other Boston Dynamics robots. These are very high dimensional state variables. But humans also have lots of state variables. And so asking you to question why can be interesting, but this is the 21st century. And you know, this why thing on MATLAB has been around how long? Oh, probably for the last 25 years. Literally. It's been there since almost the beginning. The programmers thought it'd be cool to throw these little things in there, and if you discovered it, you'd have a little excitement, a moment of excitement. You might, you know, it's a little impulse to the system, to your system, this little shock to the system, and you go, oh, that was cool, and maybe it stimulates your brain to think in a different way. But this is the 21st century, everybody. And so, how about a series of questions and answers? Now, I have the codes here, and I would do the entire codes for you, but I thought I'd just compile it into one nice rendition.
Engage in our AERE 331 group therapy.
What?
Begin recording now. Okay. Let's resume where we left off at the end of our last therapy session. To begin. Why don't you ask yourself why I keep asking why? He desperately needed it. But why do you respond in such a rude manner? Some bald person you were with last night told me to. Okay, let's change the subject for a moment. So, I really want to know, where have you been? In Elastic? Okay, not really. But that was a stretch, wasn't it?
Missed that one, didn't you?
Then where is the best place you have been? Inoperable. Very frustrating. Felt like I was insane. I can see that your travels have been what one might call a mixed bag. So let's drop this subject and return to some why questions. So if you are so smart, tell me why Hal would not open the cargo bay door for Dave. For the love of Lucifer. Why, I often ask myself, must I have to deal with moronic humanoids? You desperately needed it?
Already then. Have you had enough? Or do you truly enjoy pain?
This is 21st century, man. You know what you could do with this in a party? Come on. I mean, this means beer pong, hands down.
All I can say is that you humanoids have a very low bar for humor. Why do you think your bar is set so low?
To stimulate growth. As you know, today is hump day. It is Sahi Day. We engage in our AERE 331 group therapy. Begin recording now.
All right, it goes, it cycles through, but it's randomly programmed.
Let's resume where we left off at the end of our last therapy session.
Pre-recorded.
To begin.
You're creating the movie again and again.
So if you are so smart, tell me why Hal would not open the cargo bay door for Dave. For the entertainment from him. But why do you respond in such a rude manner? He obeyed a sexy student sitting behind you. Okay. Let's change the subject for a moment. So, I really want to know, where have you been? Insidious. Sick, but also kind of fun.
It's insidious, by the way. It doesn't...
Then where is the best place you have been? Insidious. Sick, but also kind of fun.
All right, we'll stop there.
I can see that your travels have been what one might call a mixed bag. So let's drop this subject and return to some light questions.
All right, now let's go to the code, which is Y. All right, here's some of the other codes. Now this is dynamics. What you're doing is you're programming a sequence of inputs to the system. What's the system? You got it. You're the system, and what's the output? Your boredom, your humor, your emotional response to this thing, right? And so you are a dynamical system, and it's a very high-dimensional dynamical system. And one way of creating these vocals, let's go to, where have you been? You can do this very easily if you use a random number generator that selects from your list of possible answers. Each time this where have you been file.m file is called, it generates a random number between 1 and 10, so they all have the same probability of occurring, and then it chooses one. Okay, so for example, where have you been? Insane. They don't have an airport yet, you got to be driven there. Many thanks to my family and work. Or incognito. It was fun, but I just wasn't myself. Things like this. So this leaves an opportunity, and the reason I'm presenting this is because it's very high-dimensional dynamics. This is dynamics, it's not statics. It's very high-dimensional, and I'll tell you right now, if you guys want to become entrepreneurs, like an ME friend of mine who just graduated and is now working out east but wants to run a bakery, you know what? Run a bakery. Become an entrepreneur. You would be amazed. I mean, anybody play, what's the, oh, come on. The newest card game. It's got these really stupid, sleazy answers to it. Rage Against Humanity. Cards Against Humanity. Now imagine if you were to take Cards Against Humanity and put layered vocals on it, so that it was an audio type thing. All right, and then because it's computerized, you don't have cards. What you do is you have a mouse or a little on your phone, an app where you say, I'm going to, and you see all the answers there, right? Just like you would read them from the card. Except that you press it, and then the computer, in a voice of your choosing, reads the answers. So it could be, I mean, this is technology that's available to you right now. And if you guys were to get into this game, you could make Cards Against Humanity antiquated. it would be so dynamic and so sensory and not just, visuals, but in audio in many different ways, you guys could start a company. Okay? And if you know MATLAB and you know a little bit of dynamics and you know a little bit about random number generation, this is the simplest one. Does everybody see why it's so simple? Because each of these is just a TTS, which means it goes from text to speech, and you just type in what you wanted to say. But the why question in MATLAB is a lot higher dimensional. The why question looks at this code. So what you have here is you have different cases, all right, for A. And then what you do is you have noun verbs, you have present verbs, you have sentences, so you then have connections between things. Okay? For example, and then you have prepositions as connections. So this gets into your grade school grammar. So this is far more sophisticated than simply reading one of 10 answers that you're going to hear every time. If each phrase in a sentence can be manipulated, then you'll almost certainly never hear the same phrase twice. And what's even more interesting is that you'll get very rich dynamics in the types of answers okay. What happened? Why didn't it? Oh, because you have to call Y. And then you have to TTS it. Yeah. Right. So it has to actually be called. This is a function routine. So you call Y and then you put it from text into speech. But you can get some really hilarious connections because the number of connections, some of these connections go like 10 deep. And by the time it's done saying the answer to the question why, you're like, that was absolutely bizarre. I never could have thought of anything like this. So this gets into the dynamics of human interaction. It gets into programming dynamics. And this stuff is not directly aero, except it does relate to the Mars mission. Why? How would something like this be at all remotely connected to a Mars mission? Imagine, if you will, that you code. And you'd have to have a good haircut because if you didn't, by the time you got back, you'd be Methuselah. But imagine you were an astronaut. How long are you going to be gone?
169 years.
2 years, at least. And how many people do you think you're going to be contained in? 3 or 4, 5. Do you think that would not drive you crazy? Do you think you might not want an outlet such as HAL or a MATLAB code that you can play once in a while to lighten up the atmosphere, because things are going to get really tense up there? I mean, the human factors division of NASA works on these problems. They're human factors engineering problems. They're how do you can have all the state-of-the-art technology you want, but if the people who are controlling and operating that state-of-the-art technology are psychologically compromised, you have a major problem, and hell won't be able to solve it. All right, so this gets into the psychology and psychiatry of space travel, and that shouldn't be sure. Economics, they did this for ages with with economics. Economic theory, macroeconomic theory, was all about supply and demand, the rules of economics. I'm sure you've all had an econ course where you studied these basic macroeconomic theories, right? Well, you know what economics failed to predict? a blowjob. Economics theory, the models that they had when Clinton was president, were not programmed to accommodate psychologies. And I'll tell Wells in this is economics. And so what happened after that came out in the press is the market crashed. There was a lot of real problems. There were lots of real problems with the market because the papers, the media was going berserk. Everything, people lost confidence in their president. Oh, gasp. And then the people in economics said, well, you know, maybe these soft science economists and psychologists have something that we might be able to use to better predict the markets. And so what economics, macroeconomics did, and this was right after that happened, they started to link up together with what's called soft economics, or psychological economics. Why do people make the decisions they make, and what psychology elements influence people to make the decisions they make? And so it's not it's a funny thing in one sense, but it's paramount in another sense. So when you get into these kinds of systems, you almost have to go state space. Why? Well, because you don't want to deal with transfer functions with 50th order transfer functions, right? And with 50th order transfer functions, you still only have one input and one output. When you define it, and now we're getting back to 355, when you define a state variable, you're defining an element of states, right? And so with the state variable, you see all the variables in one nice list, as opposed to embedded in a transfer function somewhere. And so that's why state variables, especially in aerospace engineering and in robotics, are paramount. But I started with transfer functions because unless you understand a single input and a single output, you can know all the mathematics of state variables you want and have no idea of what you're talking about. That's what I found when I started teaching 355. That the students, and I had taught 331 prior to that, 355 students would come in, and they all knew what eigenvalues were. They're eigenvalues for a matrix. Okay, so tell me about them. Well, they're eigenvalues. I don't know, what else can I say? Yeah, mathematically these are eigenvalues, but as an engineer, you need to know what they represent. And so they represent dynamics of a system. Real eigenvalues, all eigenvalues for a stable system have to be in the left-hand plane, right? You need stable systems. And if the eigenvalues are real in the left-hand plane, you're talking basically time constants, right? If eigenvalues in the left-hand plane are complex, you're talking time constants, but you're also talking damping ratios and natural frequencies. And so it's for me, I think it's much more appropriate to talk about transfer functions, relationships between one input and one output in the beginning, so you really understand what that relationship dynamic is all about. And then go to state variables where you have x dot equals ax plus b u, and y equals cx plus d. So we're going back to this. We started the course with this. I started the course with this, even though it's against my predilection. I started the course with this because that's where we ended with 355. And I wanted to make that bridge between 355 and 331. So the first homework in 331 was what? Here's a state space model, give me the eigenvalue, right? But then from those eigenvalues, identify time constants and damping ratios and things like this. And then, in fact, identify the transfer function. Everybody remember how to get the transfer function between this input And this output, should we just go through it? 3 minutes? How do we begin? Laplace it under zero initial conditions, right? When you Laplace it under zero initial conditions, and I'm going to write it over there because I'm going to write it directly above these or below these so that you can see immediately what's going on. This becomes S x of S, right? Because it's zero initial conditions. If this were an initial condition problem, what would this become? Remember, if f of t has f of s, then f dot of t is s f of s minus little f naught, the initial condition. So this would be x s of s minus the initial condition x naught. But with transfer functions, by definition, all initial conditions are set to zero. So this becomes this. This becomes a x of s plus b u of s. This thing becomes y of s. And I'm emphasizing by putting curlies under there, equals c x of s plus d u of s. Okay? And now how do you get the transfer function? Well, the question is, what do you mean by a transfer function? What you mean by a transfer function is the relationship between the output and the input. That's what you mean. This is the transfer function of the system. So what is it? Well, when you solve this equation for x, you get x of s is equal to si minus a inverse times u of s, right? And then you put it in here. And when you put it in here, you get the c in front of here. Then you get this. And then you get x of s, or u of s, right? But u of s is also here, so you can factor it out. And that's the transfer function. Now this is very mathematical, right? You got a matrix inverse going on here. These are n by n matrices. Okay, and this one, of course, isn't, but you have to be consistent. That's the other thing about state spaces. You have to be meticulous about dimensionality, or things don't even make any sense. Right? You can't multiply a 2 by 1 by a 2 by 1. That is not matrix multiplication. It's row column multiplication, right? If you have a matrix this way, and you want to multiply it by this matrix, row 1 times column 1. Well, no, there's only one element here, but there are two elements here. That doesn't work. That's not a proper matrix operation. So you have to be careful about your dimensional consistency with the matrices. You have to get into matrix inverses, and all of this very mathematical stuff. And it is. It's purely mathematics. If you take a course in linear algebra, which some of you may have had to some degree or another in your PhD course, you find that it's very much just generic math, right? But now, because you're engineers, people are going to want to know, what does it mean? Fine, but I didn't hire you to be a mathematician. I hired you to be an engineer. So tell me, what's the physical significance of this? And so what the physical significance of this thing is that you have a relationship. Suppose y is two outputs. So y looks like this. suppose that the input is 3 inputs. Then that relationship underlined over there, which I'm just going to call G of S, it's a matrix. What's the dimensionality of the matrix? How many rows does it have? How many columns does it have? Remember row-column multiplication? This row has to be dimensionally consistent with that column, or it doesn't work. So you have to have 3 columns in this matrix. They're G11, G12, and G13, and they're all functions of S. And then what do you have for the next one? G21, G22, G23, and that's it. And there you have it. This is the transfer function matrix. What are the elements of the transfer function matrix, do you think? Take a wild stab. Gosh. Take a wild stab. What is this? What would it be called? If this is a transfer function matrix, what would the elements in the matrix be called? What kind of functions? Transfer functions. They're just it's a matrix of transfer functions. It's a transfer function matrix or a matrix of transfer functions. So this is the transfer function between input 1 and output 1. Right? Get it? This is the transfer function between input 3 and output 1. So they're all just transfer functions between one input and one output. If you really understand transfer functions between one input and one output, you should understand this. Because there's just a whole bunch of individual transfer functions. But if you don't understand a transfer function and you start with the state space approach, which is what Ping Lu does, and Bong Wee, then you understand the mathematics, but if you don't understand transfer functions, you're not going to be very motivated to pursue the course, in my opinion, unless you really like math and you really don't care about what it applies to. So, any questions on that? We're going to go to state space now for a little bit, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go from state space to digital. That's where we're going to end up. We've got 5 weeks left now. Okay? We're going to spend 2 weeks on state space. We're not going to get, there are courses in modern controls. Ping teaches them. I taught them at Purdue. They're graduate level courses. If you can walk into a graduate level course and you know basics about feedback control systems and you know a little bit about what eigenvalues are, you're good to go. But that's where you'll spend the entire course about state space modeling systems. We're only going to get an introduction to it here. And then after that, we're going to go into digital, and the reason I usually like to end up with digital systems is because any of you who get out of here, some of you may become entrepreneurs. Some of you may actually go and work with Rockwell or Lockheed or one of these companies, and you can say, yeah, I've programmed a controller. In fact, I've simulated that controller. Really? Well, you used what? You used LSIM, didn't you? Well, yeah, doesn't everybody? No, out in here we have DSP chips that we put all our programs on. What does that mean? A DSP chip. What does it mean, you guys? It means it's digital. Everything is digital. And when you're in the digital world, you have to be acutely aware of things like sampling frequencies and aliasing. And these, how does how fast you sample affect the accuracy of your result? Turns out you're going to find out that it can totally destroy your results if you sample too slow. You can cause stable systems when you sample them if you don't sample them fast enough. So what do I mean by sampling? I mean you're going to program this into a DSP chip. There's going to be a hard controller chip that interacts with the computer that controls the motor or whatever it is you're trying to control. And if you don't sample at the right rate, you don't put the right filters in before you sample, then what's going to happen is you may end up having converted a very stable, well-behaved feedback control system to something which is going to perform horribly at best. So that's why I like to end up with it, so that some of the people who may actually want to get their hands dirty and do some programming on this stuff can actually talk to the Rockwell people and say, well, I'm not a hardcore controls person, but yeah, I programmed up some digital PIDs. And I say, oh, are you a double E? Because we don't expect that on our areas. We expect it on a double E, but not areas. Double E is mainstream for what I'm talking about. Signal processing. That's where you get your signal processing is in double E. But you guys are every bit as smart as double E's and not half as arrogant. Although, relative to some of the other engineering departments on campus, rumor has it that you are on a par with double E in terms of arrogance. Just giving you the word on the street. So, let's review a little bit about state space. How much time do we got left? We only have a few minutes left. Let's talk about this equation. Let's see. So here's an example. There's a second order system. Is it overdamped, underdamped, what? Is it an overdamped system? Is it an underdamped system? B squared minus 4AC. What's B? What's A? What's C? Do you need a calculator? Is it positive or negative? It's negative, so we have an underdamped system. I didn't ask you specifics. He's getting bored with this stuff. That's why he stopped coming to class. So then Smarty Pants, what's zeta? See, even he would actually have to think a minute. Except I wouldn't dare ask him that. All right, but now when we want, we can put this into a state space form. Let's do that. Let's put it into a state space form. Let's say that x1 of t is y dot of t, and x2 of t is y of t. All right? Then what happens to this equation in terms of x1 and x2? Come on, this you should be able to do it in your head. Y double dot is which one of the x's? Well, it's neither one of the x's because this is only x dot, or y dot. But if I do a dot on this, what do I get? x1 dot. I want a differential equation, a first order differential equation in x1, x2. So this becomes x1 dot. This becomes what? You could say it's x2 dot. You could. But that's defeating the whole purpose of the state space problem. Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, I'm talking to myself. I mean, you can call other people stupid. Say, keep it simple, stupid. Simple. Keep the elevator down level 2 max. So this becomes 3 what? Right? Okay, and now we want to put it into state space form. To put it into state space form, simplest way to do it is get into the habit of doing this. Now fill in the smiley faces. X1 dot. Do you have an equation for X1 dot? X1 dot is what? Solve this equation for X1 dot. Come on. Right? Now fill in the first row. So what we do is we give Smiley a haircut. Don't go to that barber. And you get -3, right? -100. And now we got to do the second row. Do we have an equation for X2 dot? No. Do we have an equation for X2? So can you get an equation for X2 dot? From the equation for X2? All right, how?
It'd be, since x2 dot would be y dot,
X2 dot is y dot. But then what is y dot? X1. So X2 dot is X1. So in the X2, and there's your state space. Now, this is fine, but is it necessary? No. For solving this problem to get transfer function between f and y, no, it's not. The main reason state space is important, especially in feedback control systems, is because we want to feed back not only y, but we want to feed back y dot, called proportional plus derivative control, right? I'm going to feed back not only the position y, but I'm going to feed back y dot. That's its derivative. And I want to have a constant that multiplies y and another one that multiplies y dot. Well, that's basically this, isn't it? That's x1, x2. What is x1, x2? x1 is y dot. x2 is y. So now I'm feeding back the entire state, instead of just feeding back y and taking its derivative. We'll get into this in a lot more detail on Friday. See you guys then. Have a good Monday.